tales are basically myths with English names. If we put the Latin names in them, and Greek names and Greek characters in them, they would be considered myths. But we take the Greek names and Latin names out of the myths, we call them fairy tales. So basically fairy tales are just myths with English names in them. So sometimes we lose the full depth of the meaning of them and what culture these fairy tales tie the child to. They tie them to a European frame of reference. Because fairy tales, or those people that present fairy tales, we call them griots in African culture. They broadcast the culture, help connect the child to the culture. The fairy tales provide the child a motivation to be in the belief system of the culture. Fairy tales provide the motivation for the child to accept the ceremonies and rituals of the culture. The fairy tales are the emotional motivators that help tie the child into the spiritual essence of the culture, as well as the social customs and orders. So when we embed these images and program African children with European fairy tales, we're programming them into the white way of thinking and into white culture, and then we wonder how and why we're losing them. Well, we have to look at the basis of the fairy tales, and a person that did that quite well was Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud, he used what we call myths, which are Greek and Latin fairy tales, to tie people into European culture. This is Freud right here, a rather devious character, but he used a fairy tale called Oedipus. He used that character to define the European mind. Oedipus tells a white person what's going on inside their head. He used fairy tales to define the mind of the European and basically made up their mind and how their mind works. It helps them to repeat life and helps them to repeat their destiny and purpose in life. This is Freud. He's the main perpetrator of this sort of way of thinking by using fairy tale characters that we call Oedipus. And we call this the Oedipus syndrome, and we call it id and ego, and all that comes out of European fairy tales. They use that to define their mind and to make up what they call the European mind. Another psychologist or person to help to define the mind, which is used to create these fairy tales, is a person named Jung. Jung has helped to write the script of the person. The fairy tales provide the way the person acts and reacts in the culture, and also helps a person to map out their life purpose, their life script. And so by giving them a fairy tale, you help program them into a way of living and a way of thinking. And there's another person by the name of Dr. Spock who also used Freud, and Freud used the fairy tales. Spock used Freud. He studied under Freud's way of thinking, him and his wife, for 15 years, and then they came up with how to raise a child. And everyone in this country followed that system all over the world, using the Freudian system of raising their children based on the myths or fairy tales of European culture. In other words, it teaches the child how to act and react and accept their culture. Now, as you can see right here with Pavlov, Pavlov runs experiments with a dog and found out that if you ring a bell and feed a dog, pretty soon you can just ring the bell and the dog will get hungry and have a response. So he taught the person how to program a dog with bells, and later on he used that on people. And this, of course, is the evil character, in which they believe is a demon inside of the mind of a child and a demon inside of the mind of a person. So we have the Pavlov theory as well as Sigmund Freud, who I call Sick Man Freud. So we can get that in our minds that we're actually following a sick psychology. Now, Freud related the baby to a penis. This is what goes on in these fairy tales as I go over them with you. The baby is a penis, the baby is money, money is a penis, penis is a bowel movement is a baby. In other words, they believe that man gave birth to a woman. In other words, a rib, and a rib is a long symbolic form of a penis. So through man having a penis, he gave birth to a woman, gave birth to bowel movements, babies, and all that. Those are the mythological associations made in the fairy tale that is embedded in them when you tell it to an African child, which makes them highly dangerous. Sigmund Freud, Dr. Spock, they give us this kind of understanding that when a person gets hurt in a relationship, the reason why they stay in a relationship is because the person that hurt them is the only one that can solve this problem for them. That's why you find people commonly say, why is this lady still married to this man? He's no good, that sort of thing. That comes out of the embedding that's done in the fairy tales. Because they believe it hurts. It hurts you to be wounded, but it feels good to be healed by the person who hurt you. So therefore, psychologically, you stay in a relationship, because the only way you can feel good is by having the person that hurt you to heal you. So we have to look at the way the mind is structured in the fairy tales. It gives you the foundation for this belief system. The brain absorbs data, and it's called thinking. When you absorb information, they call it thinking. When the brain memorizes that information, we call it intelligence. They only use 40% of their brain. This is the belief of the Europeans. Let me raise this transparency up some more. Idea of the mind's function is created from fairy tales and myths called edifices, I mentioned before. Anything based on a myth is a myth. So the foundation for the European mind is fairy tales, and there's also what we would call a lie. The Caucasian mind construct is not how their mind functions. They have created their mind, which is a fairy tale mind, but that is not how their mind actually functions. History reveals the actual function of the European mind. They are a predator species of people. They prey on other people's culture, music. They prey on other people's resources, and they're always at war. They have a military way of approaching food, people, religion, and science. They are military people, and they're always fighting. And their history reveals that that's how their mind is. It's always in conflict. Their brain creates conflicts with itself, conflict with nature, God, and Africans. They're always in conflict. And this kind of subliminal embedding is done by the fairy tales. Now, let us progress. I want to show you that you have to be in harmony with the child that you're raising. And we have to have this harmonious relationship. And this harmonious relationship is based on something totally different. Let's see if I can make that clear for you. See, comparison to African and European and the psychological development and the meter, how you measure the mind and growth and development, psychometric development, 9 hours old, being drawn up into a sitting position, able to prevent the head from falling backwards. An African child can do that, as I stated here, in 9 hours, where it takes a European child 6 weeks. 2 days old with head held firmly, looking at the face of the examined. They can look you in the eyes, hold the head up erect. Within 2 days, it takes a European child 8 weeks. At 7 weeks old, they can support themselves in a sitting position while watching a reflection in a mirror. It takes a European child 5 months. As you can see, our growth and development is on another schedule, so we have to give another kind of rhythm, another kind of foundation to our child with these fairy tales. And actually, we're giving our child a retarded kind of way of approaching themselves, nature, and God by using these European fairy tales. Within 5 months old, they're holding herself upright. It takes a European child 6 months. Taking a round block out of its hole in the form of a board, it takes African child 5 months, European child 11 months. 5 months old, African child standing against a mirror. It takes a European child 9 months. There's more to it, but I just want you to briefly be aware that we have a different kind of rhythmicity, and this is done in our fairy tales that helps establish the child's basis to be rhythmically connected to themselves. It's a certain rhythm that you use when you talk to children, and that rhythm is contained in African fairy tales. Now, according to the Jung and European and Sigmund Freud kind of perspective, evil is dark. As you can see, this dark creature here is preying on these white ladies. This dark demon here is preying on these white ladies. This is the shadows that's embedded in the picture. The conscious mind doesn't see, but the emotional mind sees it. This kind of embedding is done in the shadows of fairy tales. We call that masking, which is another word for hiding things. Now, I showed you the European mind. Let me show you the African mind in a constructive way. The African mind unifies the spirit, the mind, and the body to understand things. We put things together in a holistic picture to understand, whereas the Europeans, they fragment They divide to hold to understand. In other words, if I was trying to explain the vitamin C in an orange, I would say the ingredients in the orange, I say vitamin C, I say bioflavonoids, I say calcium, I say magnesium, I say zinc, I say all these nutrients, and you say, well, since I can break that down and fragment it, therefore I have a good understanding. Fragmentation means understanding to the Europeans. True and false are different in the African mind, but true and false are the same and correct in the European way of presenting things. Even in the fairy tales, as I go over them with you, they present true and false as one and the same. That's what the American Indians would call speaking with a forked tongue, or double talking. That means you're presenting a lie and the truth at the same time, and yet they accept it as one. The purpose of thoughts and actions are for ma'at, to bring justice, peace, unity to the person. That's the purpose of the fairy tales, to present ma'at. But the purpose of thoughts in European culture is to control nature, control others, and for power. To dominate, in other words. To dominate and be supreme in their way of thinking. In African mind, thoughts are connected holistically. A spiritual thought is connected to it, intellectual thought is connected to it, physical thought is connected to rhythm, is connected to color. It's all connected holistically. But in the European mind, thoughts are connected by fragmented ideas. Divide and conquer, I believe, is what we usually say. Now, we're looking at the foundation of these fairy tales, the mind, the construction of the mind that created them. Now we're going to go into the true story of the three little pigs. We're going to reveal it and see the dynamic that's played, while we always have these threes all the time in European culture. We're going to understand what the wolf is about, how men are associated with wolf, being a wolf. This is a sexual symbolism. We're going to understand about pigs and what that reveals. We're going to get into the true story of the three pigs and other fairy tales, as they are called, which actually are myths. Now, I'm going to show you this. Now, this is what a child sees. This is an innocent picture. Totally innocent, but it's loaded with symbols of European culture. Loaded with symbols. We have the forest, the king of the forest. All the stories take place in the forest. Hansel and Gretel, Little Red Robin Hood, they take place in the forest, because the forest is where growth and development occurred, where we took a person called Osiris to the swamps, papyrus, to the swamp area with the papyrus grass and the trees, and he was reborn again in the swamp forest, you see? So they're depicting this forest to show regrowth and regeneration. Forest has also symbolized danger, as Little Red Robin Hood, Hansel and Gretel, and we'll go through all of those stories to show you how danger is associated with nature, with the trees, with nature. And the witches always live in the forest. Witches, wolves, bears, all the dangers in the forest. And there's always in a house scene. Hansel and Gretel's house, Little Red Robin Hood's house. All the fairy tales take place in this forest where it's growth and development, but there's also danger there. Now we're just breaking down the symbols here. The symbol of blood. We know that we had the Pied Piper. The Pied Piper played the flute, and the Pied Piper represents the animal mind. The animal mind pulling out the animalism in people's being. That's why the Pied Piper was playing the flute to the children and pulling out the truth. So this is symbolism of evilness here. The dish and the spoon represents the penis, the bowl represents the vagina. The symbolism. The image is there. The conscious mind says it's not there. The subconscious mind, all of this registers, all of it. The blue bowl, the red, we always associate red shoes. In the Wizard of Oz, the Red Robin Hood is always red in the theme, somewhere embedded. So it's an innocent looking picture. The cow god Hathor, that's why you have cows. And that's why you have bells for school, because the cow god Hathor. See? The cow is jumping over the moon. The man is hidden in the moon. Remember the man in the moon mythology of the European culture? So we have the female and we have the man connected again, you see. And the cow is jumping over the moon, which means destroying the man. Because it's believed in European mythology, fairy tales, that the vagina destroys a man's potency, destroys his penis. And this is that symbolism embedded there. But the fairy tale, the nursery rhyme sounds quite harmless. Hey diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle, the cow jumped over the moon. The little dog laughed to see such a sport, and the dish ran away with the spoon. See, they're calling out the spirit of sexual excitation. The cow gets involved sexually with the moon, and then the dog, which you call a man, a dog, or a wolf, has fun, enjoys himself, laughs, and he calls it a sport, which rape is a sport, and then the sexual intercourse, and he can run away with the sex of the lady or cow. That's what is embedded in that sort of fairy tale that we take as being very innocent. We're going to go over some more in a minute. Remember I was saying that the red is associated with aggression, it's associated with vitality, strength, blood. The red crown of Lord Delta, that's where they got it from Africa. It's also associated with whores, red. They have a red light district where you can have sex from women. We're going back and we're going to get into these myths and see the relevance of the Greek myths. See how they relate today, that the movies are no more than an extension of the fairy tales, and the fairy tales are no more than an extension of the European mind. And the European mind is extended and built on its culture and its belief system, which is embedded in the fairy tales, which extend themselves to the movies, which you think are very different, like the Men in Black. It's the same theme that you're taught with the fairy tales, the Men in Black, with the Rumpelstiltskin and this kind of evil force. But we'll go over that. There's no difference between the movies you're seeing, 48 Hours, the Men in Black, Enemy of the People, whatever the theme is always tied back. It's always one program, the goal to capture evil by the wit of your mind, wit of your intelligence, which comes out of the Asante spider stories. This is where the Greeks stole these stories from. They stole them from Africans. We have the tree, as a lot of you are used to hearing about the tree of life, the Ankh. We have the tree of life and the tree of death. This isn't going into African folk tales. The tree of life and the tree of death, where we have this major themes. We have a message that you get from God, and this message is carried to the people. This is the message theme. And the message is that people can be reborn again or they can die. And the message sometimes is carried by a rabbit or by a snake. For instance, like the Hottentots, they say that the moon told this message to the rabbits. And the rabbits had the message and was supposed to give it to Adam and Eve, that they could be born again if they followed Ma'at. But the rabbit got a little confused there and told them the wrong message. See, he perverted and changed the message. And so he told Adam and Eve that they would die. And the moon got mad with the rabbit and threw a stick at the rabbit and split the rabbit's lip. And that's why rabbits have a split in their lip, according to our African fairy tales or myths. Even in the 90s of East Africa, we have that same story with a dog. The dog is supposed to be telling the story, and the dog's supposed to say you can be reborn or resurrected again in 3 days after death. But when the dog came to tell man, that man laughed, you see. And the dog made the dog mad, so therefore man dies now. The dog was telling man that he could be reborn again after 3 days after his death. That's why we have wakes. See, the fairy tales of the griots are connecting the children to the culture, so we still have wakes that connect us back to this 9-day story of East Africa based on the fact that God has brought us this message of rebirth and regeneration. Or you can get into the Masawas, people of Botswana, which is basically about the Kalahari Desert, what you call southern Rhodesia today, where you have the message from God being brought to you by a turtle and a rabbit. The message is that the man can be reborn again. So the message was given to a turtle and a rabbit, and of course the turtle moves slow and the rabbit moves fast. So the rabbit came to man first, and the rabbit had a bad memory. So he told the man that you'll be born, but you'll die and you won't be born again. The turtle finally got to man and gave man the correct answer, but since the turtle got there so late, the man didn't believe him. That comes out of the Masawas people of Botswana. And you have that same kind of theme repeated again with the Wabindi of East Africa, where they say that God visited the earth and he was trying to tell man that he could be reborn again. And he was delivering this message to men and creatures, But man was sleeping, the creatures were sleeping. The only one that heard him, heard God, he, she, God, was the snake. And so the snake was being able to be reborn again. That's why they shed their skin. This kind of folk tale connects you back to your culture. Our Arawaks of Guyana, they had the same kind of story where man was following all the laws by nature, and animals could be reborn again, but man had to die because they got the story mixed up. Where I'm from in Carolinas, the Sea Islands, the Yuputas of the Congo, for instance, said that God called the moon people and the earth people, but the moon people came first and man came late, so man wasn't denied rebirth, so the moon could be reborn again. That's why you get a full moon, a half moon, a waxy moon, and a waning moon, because the moon can have rebirth where man cannot, because the message was given to the moon people and the earth people, but man came too late when God called him to give him the message. And we have the same theme repeated over and over again with the galas of East Africa, where they say a bird brought the message, and the bird stopped to eat, wanted something to eat from the snake, and he said, "Snake, if you give me something to eat, I'll tell you what God told me." And so the snake told, the bird told the message to the snake, and the snake is able to be reborn again. Shedding its skin is rebirth, so that's why snakes shed their skin, because they gave the bird some food. So these little folk tales tie you back into your culture, but when you're using European folk tales, myths, it ties you back to the wrong culture and gives a foundation for you to follow the rest of the stuff. Now, a fairy tale, as I was saying, fairy tale, myth is a fairy tale with Latin and Greek words, and a fairy tale is a myth with English words. This folklore and legends of the people gives a person a plan for living. This is how you program a person. You program the child with the folk tales. It gives them a plan for living, a plan of way to control the behavior. The plan is conscious, which we call male principle, and the plan is subconscious, what we call the female principle. Life's plan is controlled by other people, by circumstances, by nature, and the person. This is what is communicated to us in the folk tales, that nature sometimes can give you obstacles, and society can give you obstacles to overcome. That's part of the life's plan. The plan's objective and the results can be predicted. The plan's objective and results can be predicted. You're free to make the choices in your plan, but you're not free to choose the consequences. You can choose to touch a fire or not touch a fire, but the consequences of touching the fire is getting burned. You're free to make the choice, but the consequences are out of your control. That's what the fairy tales are communicating to us. Now let's go back and look at the order. This is Bes, a tutelary spirit here. This is 500 BC, carving or painting in the pyramids. Bes, which is the name for a god or a spirit. And this is where we get the fairy tales from, this small person, which some people call fairies because they're very small. And the fairies in Greek mythology are goddess of vengeance. They're part of the triad of the three, relentlessness, jealousy. These are names. Alecto is relentlessness, and Magnera is jealousy. These are Greek names for these aspects. And Trisiphon, which is the avenger of death. And the fairies represent this energy force field, which they got from our ancestors in Africa. Also, we will find that the eye is repeated over and over again. We have the eye of Ru, the Ujad. The eye is a symbol of, when you find on amulets, meaning the eye of wisdom, your third eye, the special eye. And that's represented by the vagina in European fairy tales. The man is, some kind of way, the woman is destroying his third eye through sex. And wine, of course, is one of those things related to women because it's red. And they believe that that causes a man to be drunk in his morality, and it dilutes him, and it waters down his spirituality, the wine of women. Now, when we have the cows used in the fairy tales, they're alluding back to where they first learned this from, that we are nurtured by God. This is the cow nursing, the symbol of maternity. Phoenicians, Alans Tash, this is 900 BC. This is where they get the symbol of the cow jumping over the moon. All of this perverted out of African culture. The frog represents fertility, resurrection, because the frog sheds his skin. That's why you have the frogs in European fairy tales. And of course the witches are evil. They're evil women. They're destroyers of man's potency. But the symbolism is quite clear. We go back and we understand that myths and fairy tales, that's what the culture uses. The culture uses myths and fairy tales for explanation for its existence, to explain God, sex, nature, and society. It gives a person the value in life. It gives you a meaning for the rituals that you use. It defines your roles and rules and obligations in society. It also gives a continuation of the position of those in power. Fairy tale says that these people are going to stay in power no matter what you do. You have to serve the king, and it helps continue the culture. I mentioned the cow. I want to show you the cow goddess, the goddess Hathor, God in the Pharaoh. This is the cow goddess, God in the Pharaoh. These cows are sacred because they represent the female principle, represent nurturing, but they're viewed as something evil in European fairy tales. And that's how they always depict it, escaping, trying to destroy the moon by jumping over the moon. Now when you get into the fairy tales, and they always reveal how life began in some way. It's a hidden message. Earth, the god Canute makes humans from clay. This is what we believe in our mythology, in our stories, where the Europeans believe that Huma, whom made God, made man out of human, which is dirt, and that's where you get the word humus, in human being, from hum, meaning dirt. But we believe that Canute made God, made man out of on a potter's wheel. And this is reinforced in our mythologies and so-called fairy tales. And the dog is not an evil person in our stories at all. Where in the European stories or fairy tales, the dog is depicted as being something that's trying to kill Little Red Riding Hood, or sex, the animalism in man. But this is the dog, this is the priestess mask representing Anubis, the god of the dead, the god of your spirit. So it has a positive image in our myths and our stories, but when you get into European stories, fairy tales, it gets kind of diluted and distorted. And it's hard to erase this program once it's put in the child. We call it hard wiring. The child gets hardwired, and once you get that embedded in the child, it's hard to erase that image. It's too many pictures, and pictures are worth 1,000 words. The symbolism in the fairy tales causes motion in the mind, and then the motion in the mind causes the person to apply certain symbolism to the picture. In other words, they are motion pictures. You see the picture, it creates motion in your mind. And then the motion in your mind creates another picture. But if you've already programmed the motion in the child's mind, they will create another picture when they see owl symbolism. But the bird with the human head is Ba, the symbol of the soul. Whereas the birds in European fairy tales present some kind of evilness or are related to sex. I had mentioned the tree of life, and I mentioned that earlier about the trees. You have the two trees which you call bookends that hold a lot of knowledge between them and give birth to this knowledge, and so we have bookends that symbolize this. This is upheld by the goddess Hathor again. This is Memphis, Egypt. This is 1500 BC. Our fairy tales and myths go back longer than the Europeans because we taught them, mostly the Greeks, who stole a lot of things from us. Yeah, I want to get this themes of the fairy tales related to you much clearer. There are major creation themes. God creates himself. God gives messages about mortality and immortality to an animal. As I mentioned before, he gave it to a rabbit, to a turtle. The animal gives the message incorrectly to man. Man loses his immortality. Then you have to go through some trial or tribulation to have some victory over these evil, like Hercules. That's the kind of story. So he goes through trials and challenges to get back his immortality again. Then the shedding of skin, which represents regeneration and change to bring back immortality. But what I have to relate to you is a story which is the foundation for all these other stories. We got to go back to Gib and Nut, which is man and woman who had a child named Osiris. That's the heaven and the earth get together and they have a child called Osiris. So in the beginning there was no fire, there was no shelter, no laws, until Osiris was born. And then Osiris went about the world teaching Ma'at, teaching fire and architecture and things like that to people. But while he was away, his sister, wife, Isis, was in charge of the rules of Ma'at. But see, one thing happened was Osiris' brother, Set, became jealous about this because his wife was in charge. And he tried to spread bad rumors about her, that sort of thing. So he wanted to take charge. He wanted to be in control, and he didn't want his brother Osiris to be in control. So what he did was he measured Osiris's shadow, and he built a coffin that would only fit Osiris. He said, well, I guess I'll have a party, and when he comes back, I'll get him to get in the coffin, that way I can get rid of him. So he made this coffin the exact size of Osiris, measuring his shadow, which we call the Ka. And he made it out of this wonderful wood that had nice smells to it, like sandalwood and various other fragrances. The coffin smelled very good from this fragrance wood that it was made out of it. And he teamed up with 72 of Osiris's followers and the Queen of Ethiopia. The number 72 represents 36. If you divide it in half, you have 36, and 36 is a lunar cycle. So you have a male lunar cycle and a female lunar cycle represented by 36. And when you put them together, you have 72. That's why they have 72 followers in the Queen of Ethiopia. So they had this big party for Osiris when he came back from teaching people all around the world the rules of Ma'at and how to do fire and build buildings and windows and things of that sort. They had this big party, and Isis was there, and there were others. And then Set said, well, why don't y'all, whoever gets in the coffin will get a surprise, a gift. So everyone tried to get in the coffin and see whether they could fit so they could get the gift. Set got in, and other people at the party got in, Isis got in, but no one could fit. Either the coffin was too wide at the shoulder, too narrow, too long, or too short, and so no one could fit. And then Osiris said he'll try, and he got in the coffin. And when he got in, Typhoon, which is the spirit of the unseen world, spiritual world, closed the lid. And they closed the lid, and Typhoon and others took the coffin out to the river and threw the coffin in the river. That's where you get the Moses story from. And they murdered him on the 17th day, which is controlled by Hathor. Remember I showed you the cow god Hathor, which is fertility, rebirth, and regeneration, the cow god. They murdered him on the 17th day, on the 28th year of the rule of the king, which 28 represents the lunar cycle, female cycle, meaning rebirth and regeneration. They murdered him in that particular year so he could not be reborn again. So Isis and Nephthys and Ma'at and Anubis, they went looking for Osiris because they heard he was thrown in the river, because they surrounded the coffin, and they closed the lid so no one could get to it to rescue him, and they threw his coffin in the river. And some children noticed that saw them throw it in the river, and Isis, she was of course very sad about the whole thing, and she started crying and singing what people call today the blues, and she cut off her hair. But nonetheless, she met these children. The children said, we saw the coffin thrown in the water, in the river. And the coffin landed, what we call today, landed by Syria. And the king went hunting one day, and he went hunting for what we call geese, birds. And he noticed this coffin in the woods. He could just smell it. But what had happened was a tree grew up around the coffin, so the coffin was inside of the tree. But it gave us such a lovely fragrance that the king said he wanted that tree. So he had the tree cut down, and he built columns around his palace with it. And Isis heard people talking about it, and they told her that that was the spot over there where the tree was, so she went to that spot, and she started singing there. She was very upset at what happened to her husband, Osiris. So she heard that a king came and took this tree and had it cut up and made into a column, so she went to the king's palace, and she became a babysitter for the king, basically. And she babysitted the king's son. And she would have the king suck on her finger, the baby suck on her finger at night, and the finger represents the fin of the fish. The fish represents immortality. She was trying to give the child immortality, so she made a little fire, which means a representation of the sun god, the fire, the sun god. So she made a fire and put the child in the center of it. The child wasn't getting burnt or anything. She put the child in the center. And she would go away and fly around the column where her husband's coffin was inside of this column. There used to be a tree that they cut down and made into a column and put on the building, and the coffin was still inside. But she would go around the column and sing to her husband a lament, as we call it, which is basically a blues. But one night she went away to sing around the column where her husband was, Osiris, and the queen came and saw her baby in the fire and said that Isis was crazy and took the baby out. And when she did that, Isis said, now you have deprived the baby of immortality, because one more day the baby would have had immortality, but her taking the baby out of the fire, the baby would now die. This story goes on to say that anyway, Isis told the king actually what had happened, so the king said, well, I'll give you the column. So he gave Isis the column. She split it open and took the coffin out and took the coffin back to Egypt. And she went to a swamp forest, into the swamp, what we call a papyrus swamp. And she had the coffin there, and she would breathe into Osiris's mouth, and she'd flap her wings, turn into a bird again, and flap her wings, and let the sun reflect off of her to give Osiris back life. Meanwhile, she had what we call the Immaculate Conception. She had sex with Osiris' spirit and had a baby who we call Heru, which we call Immaculate Conception. But see, Set was still mad about the whole thing, and he heard rumors about it, so he went around looking for Osiris. He changed himself into a pig looking for Osiris. But one time he went hunting for gazelles by the moonlight, and he spotted Osiris and Isis. And he went over to Osiris and felt that there was a pulse in his arm that he may be coming back alive. So he cut him up in 14 pieces, which is half of a lunar cycle, which is half of the female cycle, which we call the midnight sun. He cut him up in 14 pieces and threw the pieces all over the place. And wherever the pieces were, a temple was built. Isis went about gathering these pieces back together to put her husband back together. But when he cut up Osiris, what happened was beauty and harmony left the earth, and crops wouldn't grow, and people got divorces, and there were wars everywhere, and people that were fighting, that normally didn't fight, were fighting, until she put back the pieces of Osiris so he could get rebirth. But she missed one piece. She missed what we call the phallus, which is the penis, physically called the penis, the symbol of rebirth and regeneration in African culture. She didn't get that piece back. That piece was swallowed by a fish and taken out to the ocean. So since she didn't get that piece back of Osiris, Osiris was named given the title of the Lord of Darkness, the Lord of the unseen world, and he was in charge of whether a person could be reborn again. After you die, you can be reborn again with God, but he was given that responsibility and called the Lord of Darkness. So we have these rituals that take place in Egypt where the king, the pharaoh, and the citizens go through this whole ritual of rebirth and regeneration. It's like a play, and they present these challenges to the person. These challenges to challenge the darkness to see whether you can get back your rebirth and regeneration. That's where you get the giants and the giant and the beanstalk and all these marches to challenge the person so they can win back their right to be born again. But in any case, the water represents forgetfulness. That's why the coffin was thrown into the water, forgetfulness of the amniotic fluid. So Osiris was killed by his brother Set, and his son Heru, or Horus, as I mentioned before, Isis and Osiris had a child, and his name was Heru, and he was told to revenge his father being killed by his brother Set. So he had fights with Osiris, fights with Set about killing his father, and sometimes he would win, sometimes he would lose, and they just fought continuously. And one time he asked his mother to help him out, Isis, and his mother helped him out, and he was able to tie up Set. He was getting ready to tie him up and kill him, but Isis felt sorry for her brother Set and let him go. And Set just plucked out her eye for that. And Horus, he got angry with her and cut off her head. But that's symbolic of trying not to give her rebirth and regeneration. So in any case, they fought and they fought and they fought. And one time, the gods were asked to settle this argument. So Horus had a letter from his father, Osiris, to present to these gods to say that he was a rightful heir to the throne, to be in charge, and not Set. But Set said Horus was too young and he shouldn't be in charge, and he doesn't lack the understanding or the maturity to be in charge of a whole nation of people. And the gods said, "You're right, Set." And we're getting ready to give the title to Set to be in charge. But Osiris wrote another letter, and he said, "If you guys do not follow Ma'at, you will all go in the underworld and never be reborn again. You will all be eaten by demons." So the gods had to follow the rules, just like man has to follow the rules. And they said, "Okay, we will give the title to Heru." And so Heru became the god of the seen world, the god of the earth, and Set was given the title of the god of the lesser god of the underworld, which the Europeans call heaven and hell. And that story is basically the foundation for all of these myths that we're going to go over. So it's important to understand that and have some kind of perspective, because once you see that, it becomes clear what is going on in this print. Where you have the Pharaoh's daughter rescues Moses from the Nile, and we see that the child has been put in the water, which is Osiris thrown into the water. This is the same story, but the names are changed. The word Moses means child. Child thrown in the water. But when we get into another culture, we're going to run into some problems here, particularly with the symbolism, because wells represent not only, this is the well, Christ and the Samaritan woman at the well. This is European woodcut. I'm going back to the original artwork that the Europeans used in their myths and stories. This well represents the vagina as well as the penis, and the water coming up represents ejaculation. You see, she's pouring the semen, the fluid of regeneration, into a bucket here. And she's going to use the semen to regenerate herself. These are the symbols embedded in that story there. And the challenges I mentioned, how you have to go through these challenges to have the right to be reborn again in life, that's symbolically represented by ladders or by climbing a beanstalk. This is the ladder to heaven with the 4 impediments. These are the things that are stopping a person from reaching heaven. We call these impediments or fairies. So the man is trying to overcome his challenge to get up to heaven, to go up the ladder, Jacob's ladder, or go up a beanstalk. There's always a challenge in these stories. Now, the symbolism I mentioned before is the wells. But we're going into the Freud and the European mind and what these symbols represent. All orgasms are explosions or mutilations or hills. And then you have Jack and Jill going up a hill. That represents an orgasm. Hills of mountains. The vagina is represented by wells, valleys, circles, bowls, evil, and lips. That represents the vagina. Remember, I told you the vagina is evil because it destroys a man's potency. A white person with dwarfs, that's control over weak races. That represents the white people are in control and will stay in control. Semen, as I showed you with the bucket, is water, a waterfall, a pail of water. These are sexual symbols in the fairy tales. This is what connects the African child to Europeans' myths, hardwires. The animals with genitals, that's punishment for the sin of sex. The penis is represented by the treetop, the beanstalk, the axe of the hunter in literary Robin Hood, the gun, tall buildings, candles, good, and balls are symbols of the penis. Sort of like Jack be nimble, Jack be quick, Jack jumps over the candlestick. The fire, as I mentioned before in the Osiris story where Isis put the little baby in the fire to give him rebirth and regeneration. That's the fire on the candle, represents regeneration. and the penis is symbolically represented by the candle. So you have regeneration in the penis, which is actually a homosexual ritual where Jack is jumping over the candlestick. And the wolf is always a rapist. You have whistles. Men that whistle at women are called wolf's whistle. You have a wolf in sheep clothing. All this represents a man having sex with a woman. And all bedroom scenes are seduction scenes where women lose their virginity. Because it's believed in European mythology, this is Hephaestus who splits Zeus's head open and Athena is born. The woman was created out of the brain of man. As I mentioned before, Canute, he made man out of clay on a potter's wheel, as I showed you before, whereas the Europeans believe that Adama, which is short for earth, Adam was created out of Adama, which is earth, or humans created out of hum, which is earth or dirt, whereas in Africa we use the potter's wheel. And we act out these dramas all the time. And you always have a chase or a challenge in the fairy tales. That's why you have a lot of chase scenes in movies. That represents the challenge to overcome evil. Without a chase scene, most people do not like the movies because we're hardwired as children to look for a chase scene in some way. A chase scene, be it Road Runner, Tom and Jerry, Daffy Duck, the Flintstones, Batman, Superman. They always have to have some kind of obstacle to overcome, which we call the chase scene. The chase is very popular in stories. Overcoming an obstacle. This is something that Muhammad Ali used a lot of when he started in boxing. He challenged his opponent named Sonny Liston. He would go to his house at night, sing songs, talk about his mother, his father, call him ugly, and he created this whole drama based on the fairy tales, and that tied everyone into him because he used the foundation of people's mind, how they think about things and create things based on the hardwiring of the fairy tales. Muhammad Ali used this whole drama and attracted a lot of attention to himself. Today, wrestlers use that technique. They rob that whole technique from Muhammad Ali. They go into talking about each other's mother, call him no good and all that. The wrestling industry basically uses the whole drama that Muhammad Ali made popular. Of course, he gets no credit for it, but the drama comes from that. We, of course, have exotic kind of things, sexual things, where we associate, here we have a panther as exotic. The mount for Dionysus, see, the panther, which is a woman, and this person gets on the panther. It's all sexual symbolism. This is the Macedonians, which were a barbaric group of people. Even the Greeks were afraid of the Macedonians. But this is one of their drawings from 300 BC. As I mentioned previously, the myths and fairy tales is the culture's belief. That's how a culture keeps its continuity and transmits itself. We have fantasy symbols, aesthetic, the female principle of a person is a person, a place, or thing. We call it the female principle. Then we have to explain this symbol. When you explain something, we call it rationale, the male principle, defining God, the world, and humans, evil, death, and ancestors and society. Then you have some heroic behaviors to overcome a challenge of some sort. In 48 Hours, where Eddie Murphy had to overcome a challenge of some sort, this heroic behavior is embedded in us in the fairy tales. They can be a heroic behavior of ancestors, heroes, sheroes, people, or spirits. Yeah. Now this is a picture of Orpheus. This is in Greek mythology. It's the men storytellers in the early days of the world. Orpheus is probably the most famous because Orpheus is half divine, as you can see, half animal and half man. Orpheus is the son of Apollo, actually. Orpheus is very sad and stopped telling stories because Orpheus is a famous storyteller. He's very sad. His wife Eurydice had been bitten by a snake on the heel and died and went to the world of the dead. So Orpheus wanted to go back and get his wife, basically. But he was alive and he was mortal, and his wife was dead in the spirit world, so he couldn't go into the spirit world. So he sang and played his harp. That's why you see the harp with him. And he went down to the underworld, he went down to the underworld and sang and played his harp, and there were guards at the gate, and they never seen a live person down to the spirit world, so they stopped guarding the gate and went to hear him playing his harp. And that's why he could get into the gates to the world of the dead. So he went into there, and he wanted to get with his wife who had died, who had been bitten by the snake. So he pleaded with them to let his wife come back with him. Just let his wife come back with him. And he told a very convincing story. So his wife was able to come back with him. So they were led up through a hole to a cavern, and they were led back up to the world of the living. And the person there said, "You can take your wife back, but you should not look back." And he agreed. So they went through this little cabin, went to the world of the living. His wife, who was in the spirit world, was coming back to be alive again, because he went back to bring her back from the world of the dead. So they went, he came out of the tunnel first, and he was in the world of the living. His wife was just about ready to come out, and he turned around to tell her, "You're almost there, come on." And when he turned around like that, his wife turned to stone and didn't come back to the world of living anymore. And he tried once again to go back to the world of the dead to ask for his wife to come back with him, but they wouldn't let him do that anymore. And that's basically the story of Orpheus trying to resurrect his wife. Now I'm going to go to Prometheus. As you can see from this woodcut painting, this Prometheus and the eagle, and you can see this eagle is lower it down so you can see the eagle's plucking in his body, drinking his blood, basically killing him. And this is the punishment that Prometheus got for what he did, because they had divided the ages of man up in early history. He had a golden age, a silver age, a bronze age, and an iron age. And the iron people were very crude. They just endured and survived. And the bronze people, they were a little more able to do things better than the iron people. But the iron people are actually what you call the working people. All they could do is survive. They say you're made of steel. Man has to be made of steel. Comes from that myth. Why aren't you stronger? You have to be a sterner stuff than that. That's relating back to the iron people. All they could do was work for the people, control society, and survive, pay their bills, and work. Then you had the ones just a little bit above them called the bronze people. And they had strength, they had houses and clothing, and they killed one another too. And then you get into the silver race, which we call the Iron Age, the Bronze Age. Long ago in the mythology, we call these races, the Iron Race, the Bronze Race, and you had the Silver Race. And these were people who were, Silver Race were less just. They had 4 seasons. They had the winter, summer, spring, and fall. That's where you get the seasons from, the Silver Race. But then you have the Gold Race, the Golden Age, and these people, they had spring and all the time. They had plenty of food, plenty of harmony and peace with one another. But you see, Zeus is coming out of that Iron Age, when people, the Iron Race, when people, all they could do is just work, pay bills, and survive. That's what they were destined to be all their life. So Zeus saw that things were really bad for them. Prometheus, he saw things were really bad for these people. And he said if they had fire, then they could make tools and live better. So he went to Zeus and stole fire and gave the fire to people so they could make plows and axes and cut wood and build houses and things like that. But Zeus got angry because Prometheus sold the fire. And basically what he did was he punished them. He captured him and put him on a hill and assigned this eagle to pluck at him and eat out his flesh. But he wouldn't kill him, Prometheus, because Prometheus had the secret. He had the secret that the secret was that Zeus could not kill him, still in the fire, because the fire came from another god that we call Uranus. But in any case, this is his torture for giving people fire. Excuse me, this is the way you get that up. I just wanted to show you that we are tied into this thing so deeply. I know you heard people say, "Why are you picking on me? You're always picking on me." This comes from that story. One thing stay in your mind forever. Even when people try to get away from it, such as the scientists, like we have the woodcut of a dog, canis, where you get the canine teeth. It's a woodcut from Pseudo-Albertus Magnus, Tristomagrestus. Von Hoffenburg, basically a German fellow. But here we have inherit destiny. See, you inherit your destiny. The fairy tales teach you inherit a demon, an inner voice that guides you against your own will. You say, like Flip Wilson, who is dead, an ancestor now, used to say, the devil made me do that. So we believe there's an inner voice in us that we must control at all times. And that we have faith that outside forces, money, your education, all these forces influence you. Fate. Independent. You do your own thing. Self-actualize. You can be successful. You can do your own thing. And you're forced by society. Allegiance to position. You're king. You have a duty. You have a karma. Your duty to serve your country. Your destiny is to serve the country. All this you inherit. The demon, inner voice, your fate, which is outside influence. And you try to do your own thing all your life, but you have to serve your master, your king, by being in his army, being his policeman, wanting to work for him, get a job with IBM, always want to work for your king. This is forces you to be into society. All this is given to you in the fairy tales. It gives you the motivation to be connected to the Europeans forever. That's why we have to change them around and use the African fairy tales with our children. It's a matter of spiritual life and spiritual death. Now, here you have this woodcut print of Zeus, Jupiter as you would call him, who's hurling the lightning bolts. And as you know, lightning is fire. Remember I told you his fire was stolen by Prometheus from Zeus. And then you have the symbolism of the woman and the birds here again. We'll get into the birds when we go further into the mythology. Now, there's a lot of meanings in the fairy tales. One of the hidden meanings is that only the strong shall survive. Only a strong ruler or religion has enough morality to save the people. See, you are weak and immoral because of your emotions. That's what's embedded in the fairy tales, and you always must try to overcome them. Die, you devote your life or sacrifice your life in war. The hidden meaning is you have to die to protect your morality and your religion and your ruler. So you die in a war. You sacrifice your life for your country, for the ruler, the government, the morals, or the prophet. You sacrifice your life for your prophet. You devote your whole life for a prophet, whoever that prophet may be, because the prophet saves you from you. You don't have enough intelligence or spirituality to save yourself from your evilness. You can't save yourself from your emotions and sins. You don't save yourself from oppression. Only a prophet can save you from oppression, from racism. So you're always looking for a savior, a Hercules, someone to overcome your obstacles for you. Now I'll show you the symbol of love, as we call it, which were originally black doves, but now we use the white doves. Doves are a symbol of romantic love, which in children's books. So whenever we see birds, we think of Romulus. And that's another story in itself when we get into Romulus. Yes, you see that romantic love actually ties you back into you can see the root word Roman. So we know we're dealing with Roman culture, a culture alien to African people, which is basically a distorted version of African culture, the Romans. But they were known as barbarians and heathens. So the myth, the story goes about Rome, Romulus and Remus, where you get the word Uncle Remus from, was actually an evil, no good person at one time in the mythology. That's why they called this black man Uncle Remus. In any case, there was in Latin land, there was Salius, and then there was a king Salius, and he ruled Nomentor, and his brother Romulus was violent and deceitful. So Procol died, and Amulius and his children were supposed to get the throne. So what happened was he was supposed to get the throne, and there were a lot of boys and only one girl. So he wanted to devise a way, Amulius wanted to devise a way that he could get this throne. So he killed all the boys, but he was afraid to kill this one girl. Her name was Rhea. So what he decided to do was to get Rhea, send Rhea to guard the fountains of regeneration, fire of the fountain called the Vestal, the Vesta. And these ladies who guarded this fire were called Vestal virgins. And they all had to be virgins to guard this fire, which is in Egyptian mythology, the fire represents the sun god Ra, which represents eternity and morality. So they had these Vestal virgins to guard this fire. So he was still wanted to get rid of her. So he sent someone down to persuade her to have sex. Because if she had sex, she had betrayed the obligation she had and her duty to stay a virgin. So in any case, she was raped, and she had sex, and therefore she was sent to prison, and she had these two children. One of them was called a Romulus, where you get the word Rome and romantic from, and Remus. And these boys, they grew up and they used to go in the forest. They went in the forest and they would steal from the rich and give to the poor. I guess you can hear this Robin Hood thing coming out, because this is where the story comes from. But in any case, they were caught, and one of them was put in jail, basically. And his brother, Romulus, wanted to get Remus out of jail. And so he devised a scheme to do this. As I mentioned, they stole from the rich and gave to the poor, and Remus, of course, was caught, and he wanted to get his brother out of jail. And in any case, he got an army together and eventually got his brother out of jail, and they had to get away from the Sabinas. So they established their own city on a mountain. And Remus was kind of like copying off his brother, and he jumped, and imitating his brother, he jumped and he fell and he killed himself. So that only left Romulus, where you get the word Rome from. And he established a city, and the boys had to go on a mountain and strip naked and find a companion and be with a companion. And so basically Rome was founded by homosexuals. So they had this homosexual city with young boys and their companions. And they had one problem: they couldn't have any children, so they had to devise a way to get women. So they came up with a scheme to get these women to come to their hill, to their empire. So they sent out word around the countryside that they were going to have a great festival, and it's going to be wonderful things and food and drink. And so the people from the other city brought their women and their children to this great festival. So when they came to the festival that Rome was giving these homosexual men, they needed the women so they could have offspring. And the only way to get women was to come up with this festival so they could get people from the other village to come. So when the ladies came with their husbands and their children, they surrounded the women and got the husbands off into another section, and then they raped the women so they could have children. And that's how they founded Rome, basically off of raping these women. But of course the men were mad at them for raping their wives and their daughters. But they told them that they raped the women, but the women were now Romans, and they could share in their wealth and everything and get all the benefits of being a Roman. So the other men agreed that it was all right for them to rape their mothers and their daughters and things like that. And so they were able to keep their homosexual city alive, and that city was called Rome. And that's where you get the word romance, meaning to have sex with men. And of course the women had to participate in homosexuality because that was part of being indoctrinated into the Romanist cult. And that's where you get this Rome word from. Again, we're back into these stories and fairy tales, and they show up everywhere in various aspects. Now I'm going to show you, when I was mentioning these rituals to you, the psychological mind of the European, as reflected in the fairy tales by Freud and Jung, those who dissect them, say that these sexual rituals and ceremonies are conflict, because it's natural for a woman to have sex with a man, in African culture, but in European culture, it's natural for a woman to have sex with a woman and a man to have sex with a man. So these sexual rituals, when a man has sex with a woman, it's a conflict, and they call it a battle of sex. The woman wants to have sex with a son, the woman wants to have sex with a daughter, or a prostitute, or another man, which we call adulterer. That's what the mother wants. And the mother wants to have sex with the daughters, with the boyfriend, with the daughter's boyfriend or girlfriend, or masturbate. And masturbate with focusing on the image of her daughter or her daughter's boyfriend or girlfriend. The daughter wants to have sex with her father, with the mother, or with sibling, be it her brother or sister. That's what the daughter wants. The father wants to have sex with the daughter, the son, or a friend of the daughter, or a friend of the son. This way he's having sex with the daughter if he has sex with the friend's daughter. He's having sex with the son if he has sex with the friend, with the son of the friend. Or he has sex with a prostitute or adulterer. Or he masturbates and visualizes in his mind his son or his daughter. The son wants to have sex with his mother, his father, his sister, his brother, or a prostitute. And when he has sex with a prostitute, he visualizes having sex with his mother or father, or with his sister or his brother. And this is where you get the battle of the sexes, that men are basically adulterous, meaning that they're basically homosexual in the European way of thinking, and the ladies are basically adulterous. As you know, Cosmopolitan, which is a white magazine, took a survey, and the white women said that 60% of them have adulterous relationships. And since the sexual relationship is based on fantasy, according to Freud and Jung, they visualize having sex with their son and daughter when they have sex with a woman or when they're masturbating, because masturbating is basically a sexual and emotional crime in our culture, but it's a form of life with the Europeans. And here you have the symbolism of a penis. The broom, as the witches, transports herself on a man's penis. You see, this is a form of castration to men, her having control over the penis. And this is what the European lady obviously wants, to have a penis of her own. And that's why you have so many negative things about men in their culture, that men are wolves. And as you know, there's a disease amongst white women called lupus, and lupus means wolf. The men are wolves in sheep's clothing, meaning they are deceitful and cruel like a dog. And the men change into wolves. They go into their animal nature. That's where you get this story here about Cupid. We get into the mythology or belief, folk belief about Cupid. And Cupid, Cupid's mother was jealous of a lady called Psyche. There was a lady called Psyche, and she was beautiful, and she was young, and she was one of the daughters, like you have the daughters in Cinderella. This is what this Cinderella story is based on. It's the English version of this Cupid story. So Psyche was her name, and she was beautiful, and men used to come and look at her, and Venus became jealous of Psyche. And so Psyche decided to send her son, whose name was Cupid, to get Cupid to get Psyche to marry a bad person, a man who was a wolf, who meant her no good whatsoever. But when Cupid went to Psyche, he ironically fell in love with her. So, since Psyche was so beautiful, none of the men wanted to marry her. So her father, whose name was, his name is unimportant, the father was a king, and he consulted an oracle, someone who had visions. And the oracle said, take her to a mountain, and a serpent would marry her and do her no good whatsoever. So what happened was Psyche was dressed as if she was going to die, and at the same time dressed as if she was going to be married. So she was taken to the mountain, and a Xiphus, which is a bird, came down and took her away to a valley where there was a house for her, and gold, and plenty to eat, and music. And she had servants who waited on her, but she never saw them. She just heard their voice. If she wanted something, it was brought to her. And she would go to bed at night, and when she go to bed, her husband would come to her and have sex, but she never saw her husband. And so her sisters wondered where she was, and she wrote her sisters and told her sisters where she was, and her sisters came to visit her. But her husband had warned her at night, one night when he was having sex with her, and said, don't listen to your sisters. Don't listen to them at all. They mean you no good whatsoever. But her sisters came and said, you know what you need to do? You need to get yourself a lamp and a knife and put a lamp and see who this husband is of yours and kill him. Because what he wants to do is get you pregnant and eat you and eat the baby. So Psyche took the advice of her sisters and got the lamp, and a little bit of the oil dropped on her husband. And when she put the lamp to her husband, she saw that her husband was Cupid. That's why she had the greatest love in the world and the best sex and all that, because she was actually married to Cupid. And she realized what she had done, but she dropped that oil on Cupid, and Cupid was hurt by it, and he left her and went back to his mother, who was Venus. And his mother was mad at him because she told Cupid to have him, Psyche, marry someone bad to do her no good whatsoever. But Cupid disobeyed her, so his wife Psyche had to go through these trials and tribulations, and ended up going back to Venus and trying to ask Venus for forgiveness, because she didn't want to be held higher than Venus and make Venus jealous. But Venus made her go through these deeds, said you had to separate all these seeds, millet seeds, sesame seeds. She threw them in a pile, said you had to do this, you had to do that, and all these kind of obstacles that Psyche had to overcome. But Psyche, she accomplished all these obstacles, the same as Hercules did. And so Cupid went to Jupiter, who was his father, and asked his father to intervene, and asked Mercury, who Mercury means communication, to call the gods and have a conference so he could get with his wife. And so Jupiter's father, Psyche, he was the father of the gods, so he got all the gods together, and they gave Psyche a drink to give her immortality, so she could marry Cupid. They gave her a red liquor, which is symbolically wine, and killed her. So now she's in a spirit form, and therefore she can marry this spirit called Cupid. And so Cupid and Psyche got together, and they had a child called Voluptus. That's where you get the word voluptuous at. So that once they killed her, she could be with man because she was pure. As long as a woman's alive, she's evil and cannot be trusted. That's part of the myth in this Cupid thing. And a lot of people say they want to get struck by Cupid's arrow and fall madly in love and that sort of thing, not realizing what it's tied to. It's tied to this Greek and Roman mythology. That's where you get Cupid and Psyche. As you can see, this is Psyche dropping the oil on Cupid, her lover, and hurting him, which the oil caused him to go insane, because it's believed that women cause men to go insane because men are pure and women are evil. Then the mythology progresses to the Romans, the children of Mars, that sort of thing, as you can see from and you have Sybil here, and you have Pomoda and Bertimus. Basically, you have the story of Pandora, Pandora's box, where they believe that beauty and all that's in this box of women, which is supposed to be their vagina. And the objective is to destroy the box of women with your penis. And therefore, you have to call on the mess, which are the cow gods, Bacula. That's why people say, I made a mess. And these are the cow gods. They turn into birds and change man into a bird so he can rule over women. Ugly mythology. Then you have Greek, as we went through the Greek mythology. This is Prometheus and Pandora's box, which is the secret of beauty and all that, and Demeter and Orpheus and Apollo and Hercules, which they call Hercules. So we have these major themes that go over and over and over again in the fairy tales. You have the three sisters, Psyche's sister, you have the sisters in Cinderella, the three bears, the three pigs, the three wise men. You have black and dark colors, which mean evil. You have good, which is light colors. All this is embedded in the fairy tales. You have eternal life in the fairy tales, a myth, rebirth, which means you want to stay young forever, a Peter Pan syndrome, Sleeping Beauty who stays young forever. And you sacrifice the child by murdering the child. Children are always sacrificed in the fairy tales. Rockabye baby on the treetop, when the wind blows, the cradle will drop, and all that sort of thing, where children are, violence is perpetrated upon them. And only a savior or prophet can rescue you from your evilness. That's where you get the Wizard of Oz and knights in shining armors and heroes like Hercules. And basically, people have animal desires for sex. That's represented by giants, King Kong, who's after this white woman and climbs up a steeple, the Empire State Building, which means the penis. And you have Moby Dick, which represents the penis. A man tried to overcome that in the water of a woman, which is the amniotic fluid. Then you have women. They never have a victory, and they cannot have success without being raped in some way, having sex. They have to be seduced to have sex in fairy tales. But I went over the story with you earlier, the Egyptian story of Osiris and Isis, showing you where these stories, these myths come from. You have Isis and Osiris, and you have the Ankh, and you have the sun and the horns. We went over that story earlier. But if you follow European stories, what eventually will happen is it will lead you against your culture and basically put you in the crust of the Europeans. You'll either be in a psychological prison locked up in their culture, or you'll be in a physical prison, because the fairy tales want you. They want you in prison in some way. They're about keeping black people in captivity. Let's look at some of these things. Let's look at how innocent they are. We have rub-a-dub-dub, 3 men in a tub. And who do you think they be? The butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. They all gone off on a spree. 3 men, the 3 pigs, the 3 wise men. Again, the same theme. You have the butcher, the destroyer, the baker who makes things, fashions man, and the candlestick, which means the penis. And once they have that together, along with the penis, they can all go out and spread their culture. The Romulus story. And Remus, the homosexual theme again. Then you have another homosexual theme, the hot cross buns, hot cross buns. The whelps are made on the buttocks of the boys who went up to the mountains. In Romulus and Remus story that I told you earlier, went up to the mountains naked and they met their companion, and to be initiated in the cult, they would whip them across their behinds with whips, and it caused whelps, crossings of whelps on their behind, which made them sexually excitable for their companions. So they had basically hot cross buns. 1 penny, 2 penny, hot cross buns. If you have no daughters, remember we're back to that homosexual theme, and then give them to your sons. 1 penny, 2 penny, hot cross buns. So if you have no daughters, then you have to give the boys to the sons of the female mates, of the male mates, their companions. Hush, a-bye, baby, on the treetop. When the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the bough breaks, bends, the cradle will fall. Down will come baby, cradle and all. This again is promoting violence to children, abuse of children. Who in their right mind would put a baby up in a tree in the first place? The tree represents the penis. We're missing the symbolism again. If you listen to it and read it, you say, why did they put the baby up in the tree in the first place? The tree of life and the tree of death. We went over that theme again. That's why the baby's in the tree. For ever evil under the sun, there is a remedy, or there is none. If there be none, one, try and find it. If there be none, never mind it. If there's no remedy for evil, then never mind it. Just stay where you are. Again, it's reinforcing the destiny, that it's your fate to be condemned in the condition that you're in. These fairy tales are cultural conditioners. Let's look at Rapunzel. The story of Rapunzel. This is about a childless couple. Remember? Upstairs window, they sees a witch in the garden, and the wife wanted Rapunzel's the lettuce from that garden, from the witch's garden, and the wife was pale and weak, and she wanted that lettuce. She asked her husband to go get the lettuce for her, and he made her a salad, and she liked that salad, and she asked her husband to get some more. And the husband went to the garden to steal the witch's letter, the Rapunzel lettuce, and the witch caught him, and and the witch said, I want your firstborn. And the witch claimed the child and called her Rapunzel, named her after the lettuce that the man was stealing. And that caused sin and stealing to be in the world. And when the Rapunzel was 12 years old, the witch took her and locked her in a tower, and the tower represents the penis again, and her yellow hair represents ejaculation, and the tower had no windows. So the witch used the hair to climb up to the tower every day, or when she went to see Rapunzel, which means she used the semen of the man just to regenerate herself. And then a prince rode by and heard Rapunzel singing. It never says why Rapunzel didn't tie her hair and come slide down out the window, whip her hair, and then cut her hair. It never said that. But in any case, a prince came by and heard her hollering and singing, and he saw that the witch used her hair to get up there, so he wanted to take her for himself. So the prince asked Rapunzel to let down her hair, so he climbed up there, and Rapunzel, he wanted to take Rapunzel, and he made a ladder. I don't know why he didn't use a ladder to get his army anyway, since he was a prince, to get her to escape. So Rapunzel slipped one day and said to the witch, the prince climbs up faster than you. And so the witch got angry about that and cut her hair. And the prince came one day to see Rapunzel and said, let down your hair. And the witch said, your bird, no necks, and I hope a bird catch you and scratch out your eyes if you see Rapunzel. So the prince jumped from the tower, and he jumped into these bushes, and the bushes scratched out his eyes, and he became blind. And many years later, the prince wandered into the desert where Rapunzel was, and he heard her voice, and she was crying, and he fell in love with her, and she got a vision back. This is a gross story when you really listen to it. But it's about fertility, it's about sex, it's about ejaculation, it's about the embedding image in it. And then we have this pussy in the well. You can't get any more obvious about this one. Ding, dong, bell. You have the threes again, the three wise men and three pigs. Pussies in the well. The well representing the penis. The pussy representing the vagina, of course. And the pussy is in the bucket, and the bucket is in the semen. So we're getting the symbolism again, with the boy holding a penis again. And he's next to two horses, which we call bucks. And bucks are horses that breed. So we have the symbolism here of sex. And she, of course, is the female god. She has Hathor, the bell, again. So we reinforce using the African theme, distorting it, and associating it with sex. So when the African child does, so the association made is mostly a European one, unless we go back and retrieve it completely. Then we have Rapunzel, or not Rapunzel, Rumpelstiltskin. Rump meaning but behind, and stilts are long things that men stand on, representing the penis. So you have the rump with the penis in the skin of the behind, which is a word that represents homosexuality. But the story is basically about a poor miller man who had a daughter, and the daughter, he told the king that his daughter could make gold out of straw, and the king came and took the daughter as his wife and took her back and said, you got to make this room that's full of straw into gold, and if you don't do that, then he would, of course, kill her. So the girl, she made the room out of the straw out of gold, and then this person came along, Rumpelstiltskin. He came along to help her make all of this straw into gold, and then the girl gave this dwarf, this Rumpelstiltskin character here, she gave him a ring. So the king came back to her again and said he would marry her, of course, but he demanded that she make other things into gold. But Rumpelstiltskin, in the meantime, he said what he wanted for making the straw into gold was her firstborn child. Always the firstborn child, mind you. Always kill the firstborn. That's what you call abortions, and that's what rubbers do. They kill the firstborn. So the theme is repeated so we can easily accept these kind of crimes against ourselves. But the dwarf, in 3 days, he told her he wouldn't take her firstborn if she could guess his name in 3 days. So she said ribs of beef. She said mutton chops, and she said all these things trying to guess his name. But a messenger overheard Rumpelstiltskin singing one day, and Rumpelstiltskin said his name, and he told the daughter the names, and therefore she was able to free herself from Rumpelstiltskin. But again, she's an innocent virgin being taken advantage of, and again, the theme is you can make something out of nothing. You can make gold out of nothing, straw. So everyone is searching from something for nothing, and that women are basically gold diggers. Why is it the lady didn't make gold for her father? It's beyond me. Why she want to make all the gold for the king when she could have made her father rich? The logic of the story has nothing to do with reality. It's about the embedding of an image. It's about passing on European culture. Then we have another theme. There was an old woman who lived in a shoe. She had so many children she didn't know what to do. She gave them some broth without any bread, then kissed them all soundly and put them to bed. Here's a lady, obviously has low morale. She has all these children. She lives in a shoe. She's feeding them from soup. She's obviously, women are not good. And that's the theme we have here. They're living in abject poverty. They have no help. They have no relatives. They have no friends. They buy themselves in a shoe. And this is her punishment for sex. See, this creates what we call behavioral themes. The relationship must be in conflict. Power, ritual, and ceremonial games, superior, inferior, European behavior is blended into spirituality and godliness. If you do not follow the rituals and ceremonies of the Europeans, you are ungodly, you're evil. We have rituals and ceremonies, we have books full of them. One of the books is called the Constitution of the United States. It's a book full of rituals and ceremonies. We have other books called law books. They're rituals and ceremonies of the Europeans. We have other books called economics, books on economics. It's rituals and ceremonies of the Europeans. And if you don't follow them, you're not practicing good economics, you're not following the law. They changed the name of their rituals and ceremonies. So this gives you the motive to follow them, these fairy tales. The European behavior is blended into science, biology, chemistry, astrology. If you do not follow the European rituals and ceremonies, you are not scientific, you are not smart, you're not following the law, you don't have good behavior, and all this is embedded over and over again by these fairy tales when you don't follow the logic of what's being done to your child. We have another one called Cinderella, where we have this man who's married, has his second wife. There's always a stepmother. This man's first wife died. I didn't mention what happened to Cinderella's father's first wife, but he marries his second wife, and his second wife, she's very cruel to Cinderella, and she has two ugly daughters. There's three daughters again, the three pigs, the three wise men. The theme of three is repeated over and over again. The father allows his cruel behavior to happen to Cinderella. He doesn't say anything about it, doesn't stop the stepmother from doing these things to Cinderella, having her scrubbing the floors and sleeping in the ashes and the cinder. That's why they called her Cinderella. She slept in the ashes basically to purify herself with a man instinct in her. And the king announces that there's a ball and there's a prince there. He wants to have a wife and all that sort of thing. All the women go to the ball. And the fairy godmother, who obviously a fairy godmother is a demon spirit, came to her the night of the ball. And she didn't get Cinderella out of the poverty or change the relationship she had with her stepmother. She just wanted to give her a chance to go after the goal of the man by dressing her up and using a pumpkin, change that into a coach, and then she used 6 mice, changed them into 6 horses, and then she used a rat, which is symbolic of a man. Then she used a lizard, which is symbolic of the man's penis, and changes the lizard into a footman. That's the man who rides the coach. And so Cinderella, she goes to the ball, and it's 12 o'clock, which is a midnight hour. She has to go back to her cruel condition, which the fairy godmother didn't try to correct at all. But nonetheless, she is gold digging and hunting, and she, of course, drops her shoe as the story goes, and we're back to these red shoes again, and red being symbolic of the Little Red Robin Hood, and the theme is over and over embedded. And so she's the only one that can fit into the shoe, and she gets the princess. So basically, the woman, the beauty in her charm is all she needs, and she's actually hunting for gold. She's always after wealth, the woman is. And of course, the evil women are in dark colors, black colors, because black is evil. This is embedded into the theme of Cinderella. Just by nuts and bolts of racism. Then we have the famous Little Red Riding Hood. She went to her grandmother's house. Her grandmother lived in a forest by herself, a sick old woman. The grandmother's single. Little Red Riding Hood's mother's single. We have these single women. And the sick old grandmother's living in the woods, and she sends a basket with wine in it for the sick elderly woman. And of course, Little Red Riding Hood obviously has bad vision, and she doesn't know a wolf from her grandmother. And obviously, Little Red Riding Hood was never told that there's danger in the forest. And she seems to be perfectly all right with a wolf talking to her in the forest. And she goes in the forest unaware of the dangers in it, yet she lives in the forest. And why the mother wants to send Little Red Riding Hood off by herself and she knows there's wolves in the forest obviously indicates some form of child abuse in the first place. But in any case, Little Red Riding Hood seems to accept the fact that the wolf can talk, and she talks to the wolf, and the wolf's talking to her. It's no big surprise, and she goes and picks flowers, because the wolf told her to pick some flowers, and the flowers represent fertility. All this is taken as normal. And her mother told her not to go off the path in the first place. So don't go off the path, go straight to your grandmother's house. She goes off the path, picks some flowers because some wolf told her. So she disobeys her mother. And then she doesn't, the wolf goes to the grandmother's house in a wolf's voice and knocks on the door and said, "It's me, Little Red Riding Hood." And her grandmother's hearing must be pretty bad because the door was open, plus the wolf can only sound like a wolf. And so she didn't recognize her own granddaughter's voice. All these things are just taken as normal. And the wolf, of course, he swallows the grandmother, her clothes, her shoes, and everything, which is a form of pregnancy. Symbolically, the wolf becomes pregnant. And he puts on the nightgown, which is an African garb, and gets in the bed with this big stomach, since now pregnant with the grandmother, since he swallowed her. In any case, the wolf, Little Red Riding Hood, comes into the house and said, "Oh, Grandma, what big teeth you have," as if she doesn't know human teeth from dog's teeth. The whole thing is really illogical, but the imaging is there. And of course, the wolf ate Little Red Riding Hood, and he becomes pregnant again. And then the hunter sees this whole thing, and he knocks on the door. Why he knocks on the door is beyond me. He didn't hear anything. He just happened to be in the woods. Knocked on the door. And the wolf was asleep with this big stomach. So he cuts open the wolf's stomach, which means he gives birth to Little Red Riding Hood and the grandmother. So we have a rebirth and regeneration symbolism. And then Little Red Riding Hood puts stones in the wolf's stomach and sews it back up. And the wolf wakes up and tries to run, but since he had stones in his stomach, he couldn't run too good. And the wolf, the hunter kills the wolf, skins him, takes the fur, which gives him the power of the wolf. And they drink the wine and have a good time. The whole story is rather absurd when you look at it, but it's the imaging that's bad. That's why we have this red constantly. We have the fire, the sun god. We have the wolf, which is the dog that guards the gate. We have the wine. We have the grapes. We have the bed, which is a seduction scene, as I mentioned before. It's always sexual related. It goes over and over and over again. But I just want to show you about this red here. It's no accident that they pick red, because as you can see from this holistic chart, that red is down in the area of the sex organs. The perineum, the sex organ, closer to the behind, the rectum, the anus. Orange would be the sex, the ovaries and testicles, but red is in the area of the sex organs as well as the anus. It's associated with the anus mostly in European culture, but generally speaking, red is associated with the sex organs. So you get that red color over and over again because people associate it with sex. No accident again. This kind of embedding. So from now on, when you see these little fairy tales, as they're commonly called today, you can understand the symbolism of Jack and Jill that went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. The well represented the penis, the water represented semen. We have Jack and Jill holding the semen here in the bucket, and they're going up the hill. The hill represents erection. And once they get the semen from the erection, that's when Jack falls down and breaks his crown, which means he has sexual excitement. And then Jill comes tumbling after him. Now she's coming down off her sexual citation. Again, we have the woods, the forest, where some danger is lurking. The same thing is repeated. There's always some house in the forest. Hansel and Gretel, the wolf, the grandmother's house. The rabbits are very sexual. Nothing breeds more than a rabbit. We associate rabbits with sex and breeding. So the whole theme of this is sexual embedding. And then we wonder what's wrong with our children. But we're feeding them these nursery rhymes, and basically the nursery rhymes approve violence. They approve the mutilation of the body, where wolves are killing someone and swallowing them. And they approve cannibalism, where people are being eaten. And they approve murder and injury to others. Rock-a-bye baby on the treetop and the baby falls down. And bodily harm to children, where children are being abused. Cinderella is being abused by her stepmother. This bodily harm and rape is always approved, where a prince comes by, sees a beautiful lady, doesn't talk to her, just knows her names and proceeds to have sex with her. That's known as petty rape. All of these themes are hammered into the children over and over and over again, and then we wonder what's going on. I mentioned this Hansel and Gretel, which in itself is an ugly theme. But here again we have the house in the woods, we have the stepmother, and the woodcutter who were married, and they have this child abuse going on with Hansel and Gretel. And the stepmother wants to get rid of the children because they say they don't have enough food and stuff to survive, so they want to get rid of the children. Her way of getting rid of the children is to send them off in the woods. And the father goes along with the stepmother doing this to his blood children. And so he says, oh no, but he says it reluctantly in the story. So the woman told the husband to take the children to the woods and leave them there. And he takes his own children to the woods and leave them there. And the children overhear the stepmother telling the father the scheme, and that's when they decide to sneak out the house, fill their pockets with rocks, and throw rocks along the trail as the stepmother takes them into the woods. And that's why they were able to find their way back the first night the stepmother did it, because they just looked where the rocks were. But again, the stepmother wanted to get rid of the children. If she was abusing them, the father lets this go on. And this time they put some bread in their pocket, and they throw breadcrumbs. But unwittingly, a bird eats the breadcrumbs, and the bird is symbolic. It's a black bird that does this, of course. Eats the breadcrumbs. And the bird is symbolic of sex, destruction. You have the bird of youth, the bird. In European culture, a bird is a penis, or a cock, a rooster. A cock is a penis. So you have the penis destroying the food of the children. That's the symbolic embedding there. And the children walked through the woods, and for 2 days, and the third day they came to this gingerbread house. Remember, three bears, 3 pigs. On the third day they came to the gingerbread house, the candy house, and started eating on it. And this witch in there wanted to know who was messing with the house, of course. And the witch acted like the children wouldn't eat her sweets. She seemed to be so totally surprised. She had this candy house, and children would come by and eat on it. She's surprised at the whole thing, when actually the house is made out of candy to bait children. This is a children trap, again, so they can abuse the children. So the witch invites them in, feeds them, they fall asleep, and on the 4th day, she locks Hansel in a cage, and Gretel brought some food, and Hansel used a chicken bone, which he gave to the wolf, the witch, and the witch thought that this chicken bone was him, so she just wasn't giving him any food, and he was getting skinnier and skinnier and skinnier because he was starving to death. So again, we have child abuse. So the wolf couldn't, the witch, who was testing his finger to see how whether he was starving, he would always give her the chicken bone. So this woman couldn't tell the difference between a chicken bone and a finger, which is absurd in itself. And after a month, which is a lunar cycle, she eats Hansel. And then she bakes Gretel, but Gretel had a scheme because the lady was going to bake her, so Gretel, she stuck her head in the oven to test to see how hot it was, but Gretel acted like she didn't understand how to put her head in the oven to see how hot it was, so the witch went over there to demonstrate and stuck her head in there, and Gretel pushed the woman in the oven and, of course, killed her, baked her to death. So we have child abuse, we have the whole theme is abusive, how the children abuse, the stepmother abuses, the lady abuses, sets children trap, and of course Hansel and Gretel, they sing all over the house, and they found pearls, and they just proceeded to loot the woman's house. Took the pearls and the diamonds, and they stole them. They went back to the lake and asked a white goose to take them across, and it did, and they found the home where their stepmother was dead by this time, and they stayed with their father happily ever after and gave him the diamonds. And they weren't hungry anymore, even though the father allowed them to be abused or took them to the woods to get rid of them. All this is going on, but they say nothing about the father. Then you have the prince, the frog prince, and of course the tongue of the frog represents the penis, and the prince changes into a frog. So you have the princess, he sits by a deep well in the woods. This is where this princess sits by a deep well, and she tosses a gold ball in it, and of course the ball represents a penis, and the water represents semen, and the gold ball represents rebirth. And she tosses this ball into a well, and the frog said he could get it for her because she was just playing with her ball by the well for some reason. And it wasn't a well, and the frog said he could get it for her, and of course he retrieved it for her. But he said, I'll get it for you, but you have to let me sleep with you and eat with you and do other little sexual things with you. And the princess said yes to this request of the frog. She just didn't believe he could get it in the first place. He got the ball, gave it back to her, and the princess forgot about the promises she would let this frog sleep with her and eat with her and sit in her lap and all this sort of thing. And why a frog wants to mate with a woman is beyond me, but the frog represents rebirth and regeneration, and it also represents the man's penis. So it was a royal dinner, and the frog knocked on the door and said he wanted to come in, and he wanted to be with the princess, and the king said no, and then the frog told the king about what had happened. So the king said, you have to do what the frog said do. So he told the daughter she had to sleep with the frog. And so the daughter put the frog in a corner like that, and she wouldn't sleep with the frog. So the princess cried about the whole incident, and the frog jumped up in the bed with her, and the princess threw the frog against the wall, and the frog fell down, and he turned into a prince. And the prince said, will you be my wife? And the princess said yes. And why he wanted to marry a woman who was so cruel to him is beyond me. Threw him up against the wall, lied to him, and all this goes on to show how evil and deceitful women are, even the ones, especially the ones with the most beauty. So obviously the woman is mentally unstable, abusive, and lies, and has sex with animals in the story. But this is transmitted to our children. This is the frog prince. These stories are not innocent at all. They're not. We have to be aware of this. The theme, the behavioral themes in them are women are basically pure, and their sexual charm causes men to be bad in their behavior. Women are in relationships because their sexual charm is rated higher than their intelligence. They're always beautiful, and therefore they can marry the prince. It has nothing to do with intelligence. The women, they must be in a battle, a conflict between good and evil. To lose a battle means a character, it means that there's something wrong with your character, there's something wrong with your morality, you have a spiritual deficit if you lose this battle in life. Good wins over evil, therefore the Caucasians are good. God, prophets, or the universe or a miracle will save you because you're incapable of saving yourself. So black people are taught by these fairy tales that they can't save themselves. They have to wait for a prophet, a savior, a messiah, and that good wins over evil, so subconsciously black people think that they are evil because the fairy tales embed this over and over and over again. If you're winning, it's because you're good. And if you lose your battle against the Caucasians who are good, that means that you have some sort of character problem, you have some morality problem, you have a spiritual deficit, there's something wrong with your karma. The universe is going to save you. And all these little themes we search for. So we always search for something to escape us from our predicament. I believe I can fly. I believe I can touch the sky. We always like escape songs. And we wonder why these things are going on. Then you have the shoemaker and the elves. The shoemaker and the elves theme. Again, we have a poor couple who don't have any children. Only lever to make one pair of shoes. So the man cuts out a pattern for this pair of shoes and leaves it on a bench. And while he's asleep, these elves come and make the shoes. So he sells the shoes, and he's able to buy enough leather to make 4 pairs of shoes. Then he makes 4 pairs of shoes, and he's able to make more money, and he's no longer poor, and he's wealthy, and he wants to thank whoever it is doing this. So him and his wife stay up at night and hide in the closet and see these elves come out and make shoes. And in gratitude, they make clothes for the elves. And the elves put on the clothes, and they leave. So all they get for all the wealth they've given to this couple is a pair of clothes. It's a very sad theme, meaning that the poor, the elves, can be satisfied with good clothes but not wealth. They don't need to be wealthy. All they need is to look good, have the best clothes, designer jeans, all that sort of thing. This theme is embedded in our children, to want clothes, to want to look good, but we don't want the wealth at all. We're happy. We're singing. We're rapping. All this is subliminally broadcast to our children by these fairy tales. We really need to look at them. We need to look at the Snow White. The queen sewing pricks her finger, which is a symbol of blood, and the finger is a symbol of the penis, and the blood is a symbol of the period. And then she pricks her finger by an open window, and she takes her finger to an open window to cool it. This is how you cool down a hot penis, by giving it some more behind. The behind is a cooling sexual involvement for the man. That's why they have anal sex and vaginal sex. It's all embedded in this Snow White thing. And it's 3 drops of blood, mind you. 3 pigs, 3 wise men that drop from her finger and fall on the snow, which represent menstruation blood. And this is what's taught to the child. So in this lady, the birth, Snow White, she dies shortly after birth, and a new queen, which is a resurrection of her, which is the true evil and cruel one, is punishing her for her sexuality. The queen looks in the mirror and says, Snow White didn't die, but I'm trying to say the queen looks in this mirror and says, who's the fairest of it all? The mirror represents your reflection, your double, which we call your ka. Who's the fairest of it all? And they say, well, Snow White is 100 times fairer than you. And fair is the word for white. You're fair white. Who is the whitest of them all? And so the mirror says, Snow White is 100 times whiter than you, the fairest of them all. And the queen told the huntsman to find take the Snow White out somewhere and kill her, and bring back the heart. And the heart is why you give a person the heart on Valentine's Day, which means that you're fair, which means that you're beauty, and all that sort of thing. And the huntsman takes Snow White out to the woods and lets her go, and kills a deer and gives a deer's heart to the lady. And Snow White wanders in the woods and is found by these 7 dwarfs, who represent the 7 planets. And she went in their house and ate their food and drank their food and went to sleep in their bed, which is a symbol of seduction. And these 7 dwarfs, of course, are wealthy men. They are miners. They work in the mine, and they're wealthy. And they work in gold mines. We get into the symbol of the colors again. And they sell gold and stuff to earn a living. And they warn Snow White not to let anyone in their house. They say, you can stay here, Snow White, but don't let anyone out, but you got to cook. You got to keep our house clean for us. And Snow White stays there. But one day she let this woman bring by some apples, and she decided to bite the apple, and she bit the apple, and the apple poisoned her, and she went to sleep in the forest. And on the dwarfs cried for 3 days, and then they decide to bury her. We get that symbol of 3s again. And the dwarfs decide to bury her, and this prince comes along and wakes her out of her sleep. Out of her sleep. Now we see that same theme again of Osiris in the coffin. The 7s is part of the lunar cycle, 7, 14, 21, 28. We have the lunar cycle again. We have the fire, the sun god. We have Snow White in the coffin now instead of Osiris. And we have this blackbird, which is Isis again, hovering around the coffin to reflect light. We have the African theme, but it's so distorted we don't see it. So that way when we present this theme to our children, they still have this hardwired in their brain about the Snow White and this whole business. So in any case, they bury in a cave, and she's asleep, and the prince comes by and sees how beautiful she is and wants to marry her and kisses her and brings her back to life. And the queen says, who's the fairest of them all? And the mirror says, Snow White. And she's really upset about this whole incident in the Snow White and the 7 dwarfs, or the 7 lunar cycles. But it helps to instill in us that that sex, the hidden meaning is that sex is evil, and only the European type sex and mating saves you from evil. And sex slang words are curse words. All the curse words are sexual slang words. So, sex is a curse. Then you have the slang words for sexual intercourse are dirty words. Don't talk dirty around children. Don't curse around children. So therefore, sex is dirty. Bad relationships are caused by emotional sex. You're emotionally involved with the woman because she's beautiful and captivating. Not that she's contributing to my truth and justice and all that sort of thing. It's her beauty that gets her in trouble. It's always her beauty. It's always emotionalism. So when we start seeing these themes again, we have to be more aware of the embedding that's going on. As I mentioned when I started with this talk on the damage of fairy tales, the penis and the vagina, the fiddler, the Pied Piper calling out this animalism, attracting the trueness of the children with the animalism, the penis symbol, the forest being dangerous, the house in the forest, the dog with the red on Cinderella, Little Red Robin Hood, the man, the cow jumping over the moon, the female god trying to destroy the penis with her vagina. The theme is embedded there. And as they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. And to reconstitute our village, to get back our children, we have to get them back with our stories. We cannot use the European stories. They will lead our children into crime. They will lead our children into conflict with African culture, and therefore in conflict with themselves. It's very important. We have to use our highlight the eternal relationship. They highlight that for us. They highlight the internal relationship. They highlight the village, the family, the child, the ancestors, the babysitting system, and all that's centered around Ma'at. That's why we need our stories. Our stories help our children to be programmed in an African way. Helps to give the stories, give them the motion to be motivated to be attached to our African belief system and our African morality and our African Ma'at system of truth, justice, and righteousness. And remember that these themes are repeated over and over and over again. The themes of the fairy tales. These themes are in the movies and the newspapers. The human race loses its purification in some way. Through a job, through bad relationships, you lose your purification. You become immortal. You lose your immortality. And you have to ask for forgiveness for your fall, your imperfection, your sins. So you go to meditate and say mantras and say these positive affirmations because you're asking for forgiveness for your humanness, because there's something embeddedly wrong with you. That's what the fairy tales tell you. You cannot trust your nature. You have to be rescued from sin by a prophet or a miracle or God. Everything is up. If you lose your money, God meant it to be that way. If you have a bad day is a lesson for you. Everything is up. Everything is godly. Some things are just bad. So therefore you say that slavery is up. There's some godly reason why we are enslaved. Because the fairy tales teach you that everything is up, caused by God. Ultimately, it causes good fortune and bad fortune. It's divine choice. Your life is written for you. Your destiny is written for you. All you're going to do is follow it. By looking at the fairy tales with clearness, when we see this embedding in commercials, we know where it's coming from. They extend it this far. We talked about the little girl playing with the ball by the water fountain. It falls in the water fountain, and then the frog says he can retrieve the ball. We go back to ball, because if we tie them back to the fairy tales, they're tying the culture back to its beginning, to the Oedipus syndrome, to that mentality, to all those things. And we have to tie our children back to our fairy tales, which put them back 4,000 years is a depth to our fairy tales. So here we have this embedding, we have that red again, remember Little Red Riding Hood? The same images over and over and over again. We have the unity, the couples looking in the same direction. This lady's on her right foot, this man's on his right foot. This lady's on her right foot, this man is on his right foot. They're both looking in the same direction. We have the red, we have the pink, symbolic of Little Red Riding Hood, remember? And they're both unified, they're together. He's holding her, but the black couple, as you can see, both of them are on their left foot. They're out of sync with reality. They're out of step with rightness, with whiteness, you see? And we're carrying the golf club as if it is a club in a violent sort of way over our shoulder to strike someone with. And of course, we're not looking in the same direction. We're not standing together. We're apart, and we're walking on the white people's shadows. And begging people always got their hand out. So this negativism in this commercial here for a memory kind of supplement goes all the way back to the fairy tales. Just like Enemy of the People, Men in Black, all the stories tie back to a fairy tale, tie back to the culture, which we are trying to get out of our system, but it's constantly put at us. And look at this little commercial. See the forest again? You have some challenge to go through in the forest. Hansel and Gretel, Little Red Riding Hood, always a challenge, always in the forest. And again we have the red. Again we have the couple running together, looking at each other in unity. You see. Again we have the same thing. They are in motion. They are going somewhere. They're going to the right. They're in the area going toward righteousness. We're over on the left side, left out. We're the only people not moving in this commercial. And we are blue. The man is blue. We are not looking at each other. And the word that's over us is worries. Black people are worried for white people. And it's natural for us to be worried because we are poor. And of course, black women are easy to have sex with. So we have the word easy on the black woman, worry next to the couple. And they're sitting down on their lazy behind. Don't want to do no work on welfare. All this is embedded in this commercial here. This lady's rolling on the roller skates, but she's pointing up to the sky, to a higher self. This lady's pointing up to a higher self. What are we doing? Pointing down to the ground. The embedding is there. Of course, we have the theme with the water, the sexual theme with the semen, the water, that sort of thing, the erections here. It's all there if you look at it. But these images are projected at us when we're young, so they just keep projecting the same image over and over again to sell their merchandise. And things become so obvious that we don't even see it sometimes. We don't see it sometimes. This is what you call a minstrel character. This is how white people thought black people looked. They paint us with big lips, nappy, kinky hair, eyes sticking, popping out because we're afraid of the dark, we're afraid of shadows. We are fearful people, you see. We're dressed up and we're afraid. And of course, McDonald has big lips and an African wig, which is red. We're back to the red again. Little Red Riding Hood, the red shoes, and Cinderella, the red again. It's embedded in us so deeply that sometimes we miss it. So this is the self-hatred, where we hate the witch who's wearing black, the wicked witch of the West and the East. As long as they use these childish themes, the same thing is used in E.T., the famous movie. E.T. is like someone from outer space coming to rescue the people on Earth with kindness. It's the same theme, that we have to be rescued from our predicament by a prophet, a messiah, the universe, nature. Now we have the embedding of sex, and blue is associated with black people. So right away we know this is sexual involvement. Right away. So when we look at the fairy tales, we have to be more clear about that. I want to show you how they embedded the sex in this. When you blow it up and look at it closely, then you see. So when we look at the fairy tales, we have to look at them with an African eye and realize that we cannot use European fairy tales with black children. It embeds European culture, bonds them to European culture, European symbolism, European sexuality, European values, Europeans' relationship problems, European-ness. We de-Africanize our children with the European fairy tales. We have to use African fairy tales, African myths, to bond them back to the deep culture that we possess and the richness that we own as our birthright as melanin-dominant people. European fairy tales are dangerous.